Motivation and inspiration are powerful tools that change and influence perspectives, voices, and projects that shape the world. With all the negativity in the world, it can be hard to find those rare and beautiful stories that tell of inspired spiritual activism and individual healing journeys. Walk the path with me, Dr. Trish DeRocher, on the show Heart.Change.Consciousness, where we inspire listeners to take action towards a more just world. We'll hear from authors, change makers, influencers, activists, poets, filmmakers, and cultural workers who practice inspired spiritual activism and transform vulnerabilities into sources of strength. Heart.Change.Consciousness allows us to understand the world from different perspectives and highlights what is possible when we are fearless and open ourselves to our soul purpose and engage each other across boundaries. So let's self-heal and open the path to self-sovereignty. Heart.Change.Consciousness begins now. Hello, I'm Dr. Trish DeRocher and host of Heart.Change.Consciousness, and thank you so much for being here with us today and listening in. Today, I am here with independent vocalist and musician Senayit Tomlinson to talk about her work in creating Mountains Way Sanctuary on her family land in Orford, New Hampshire, which is on Abenaki land. Senayit is building this space with the intention of providing it as an offering for BIPOC folks or Black, Indigenous people of color to come to relax and recover from the daily lived effects of white supremacy in this country. Senayit is simultaneously offering facilitated workshops for white-bodied people to engage in a form of energetic reparations, which we'll talk more about today, by undergoing the emotional labor of unlearning white supremacist principles and logics through sustained reflection and dialogue with both white-bodied and BIPOC facilitators. Proceeds from these workshops for white-bodied participants go directly to provide a form of reciprocity and funding opportunities for respite and nourishment for BIPOC folks at Mountains Way on an as-needed basis, in addition to more organized retreats. So I first met Senayit when I attended a two-day Ally to Accomplice workshop at Mountains Way last fall. And before I went, we had a phone conversation. And I knew just from that conversation that it would be a fit based on the words that Senayit was using and the energy that I could feel was infusing them, especially in her vocalized desire to create a different kind of organizing space. As Senayit told me then, the youth are on the front lines of the movements for racial justice, and they're doing a great job. Senayit's vision is not to replicate this work or offer, a corrective to it, but to offer an additional kind of space rooted in working across racial lines in an intentional, focused way. So Senayit's fire, coupled with her introspection and deep connection to spirit, offers a glimpse of what activism can look like in the service of spirit. Her vision holds an energetic blueprint of the type of world that is possible when we each take accountability for ourselves and our histories to co-create the world that we want to be living in and the world we want to pass on to those who come after. So Senayit, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, wow. You got me all teary in your introduction. You are so welcome.
So, Senayit, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I appreciated deeply about the Ally to Accomplice workshop that I attended last year, to introduce listeners to some of your work and how you approach it. And also because I know that you're going to be offering more Ally to Accomplice trainings this summer. So instead of being, sometimes we go to workshops and they're very rigid, right? There's like a very tight schedule, like this and this and this. And then by the end, we'll like solve all the world's problems, right? And So what I really appreciated was that the pace was very intentional and contemplative, and very much focused on an embodied way of unlearning white supremacist logic. So the body was really front and center throughout all aspects. We sat in circle, guided by white-bodied facilitators who've been trained in conscious communication methods, witness stories and perspectives shared consensually by BIPOC folks, right? And the consensually piece is really important, who agreed to take on this form of emotional labor for the purpose of the workshop. And we also had downtime to kind of walk on the land and incorporate and reflect. We co-created our collective time together. We kind of decided as a group what would be useful. And there was a lot of collaborative thinking about next steps, both individually for us, each as participants, and also as the collective. There was also a big focus on taking responsibility for ourselves in group. And learning how to energetically take care of ourselves to be with what arose, so that we could remain present for the long haul, right? So sometimes there can be a lot of burnout. It's kind of fierce and fast, and people can get overwhelmed. But we were really encouraged to listen to our bodies. So as someone who has spent some time in social justice realms, the intentional slowing down and the active encouragement of participants to be with what was arising in our own bodies really showed me a path forward for activism done differently. That really allows for this deep, sustained, long-term engagement without the burnout. And also an important unlearning of white supremacist capital logics that frame the body as a machine, right? As something to just kind of for utilitarian purposes. And of course, this logic is a primary way that we become disconnected from ourselves and forget that we even have bodies and that our bodies have wisdom in them. It also offers a more conducive space for introverted and energetically sensitive people, right? Who are kind of transmuting the energies and the density that's coming up in real time, as these conversations are happening. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think that this is really a deep part of the beauty of the containers that you're offering at Mountains Way. And also name that this is really difficult work to do, right? So when we're doing this kind of collaborative cross-border work, there can be the kind of danger of erring too far on one side and having it turn into this kind of kumbaya, right? Like where the difficult things are being avoided to keep everyone comfortable and kind of feeling safe. And then erring too far on the other side, there can be kind of a reenactment of policing logics that actually enforce a parallel, not the same by any means, but a parallel form of violence, right? To, what it is we want to kind of usher out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to put that forward and just see your thoughts on that, because I know that's something that you've had to think about in creating these containers.
Well, definitely. I mean, just also in my own survival. So a lot of this has come out of just, or I mean, pretty much all of it has come out of um, work I was doing for myself, work that my other Black friends and I were doing together in the last 10 years, really. And that, yeah, it is so important at this point not to shy away from difficult places and difficult conversations. This is exactly like when it feels uncomfortable. Well, this is exactly when we are really getting into the thick of what we should. Yeah. And part of what we're trying to do is figure out how to recognize, we all know that this is a need. How do we provide a safe space for that? How do we do that while also protecting our BIPOC folks from emotional labor that is not recognized? And how do we provide a place for our white allies and accomplices to really work out what needs to be worked out? And this disembodiment, this disassociation, which is really what I think,
Yeah.
all of this is stemming from deep systemic trauma, because in the end we all come from indigenous people, like all of us. And so this disembodied trauma work is so powerful, and I'm very much a person who needs to have particular type of sensitivity and um sensitivity, and also like freedom to work through things in ways that are not just about a classroom, about sitting down and writing things out and working things through, which is, again, as you had put so well, is part of this white supremacist patriarchal model that we're in. And I would add in capitalist
Yeah.
in that. And so we are all very much struggling underneath this. I like to look at all these systems as energetic, so the patriarchy affects men and women,
Mhm.
and it affects us differently. The white supremacy affects Black and white and other folks as well, and all affects us differently. But all these energetic systems are really against all of our nature. And one of the things we're trying to do is figure out a way to provide the respite and care that Black-bodied folks and brown-bodied folks need right now to just regroup and find thriving as opposed to surviving part of
Yeah.
their sentence of life. And also, how do we provide a safe space for white-bodied folks who really do want to do this work to be able to do it safely as well?
Mhm.
I,
Mhm.
I think I answered.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you talking about how these systems are energetic, right? Because I think a lot of people, um, will engage mentally, right? There's like kind of an intellectual disconnect, but once we really tap into our bodies, there's so much trauma again experienced differently and on different kind of sides of the power line, of course. But in these systems, we all lose, right? And when we can understand that these systems are energetic and so therefore they are operating energetically in us, then it becomes imperative that we address the body and the energy body, right? Not just the physical body, but the energy body, the heart, so that we can really kind of extract these internalized energies that aren't ours and that do keep us from entering into sovereignty.
Exactly. And so you brought up something so beautifully. So if we are 4% matter
Yeah.
in all how we feel solid,
Yeah.
then the rest is this energetic piece. And also, how do um I have two links to a couple podcasts that I will share, or I'll share later as well, on any of these feeds. That one of the pieces that's brought up is like how, especially with white-bodied folks, because we need y'all so much right now. We really need white folks to go towards their own culture and really do this energetic emotional labor. What does it look like to really look into this, right? And where do we give ourselves these loopholes to get out of something where we're like, well, it just doesn't feel right? Like, of course, okay, the majority of white bodied people do not want to burn Black bodies or string them up in a tree. But there are all of the systemic pieces that are coming out of this energetic framework, which is really around like a small group of people in power over a larger group of people who actually have the power, which has been going on for millennia. So what does it look like when white-bodied folks who we need so much, who actually are in this kind of middle range, they're not Trump supporters, they're not, you know, and they're feeling like they're good people. So I don't think I am actually racist. Like, how do we get to those places where we're like, well, this is a system that is racist and there is no way to escape it on either side. There is a purity in being a person who is marginalized in the sense that you can be like, this is problematic, don't do this to me, or this is wrong. But there is no conversation about what happens when you are the person who is benefiting from that structure.
Right.
Regardless of what your heart or your religion or whatever else tells you.
Right. Yeah, and I think that these offerings are really important because there are a lot of white-bodied folks who do understand intellectually, who have this understanding of like, I'm a good person, but haven't done the embodied work, haven't done the heart work, haven't really looked into ancestry. Again, if we're thinking energetics, that karmic piece, that ancestral inheritance is in our fields. Who also don't know kind of where to look for the tools to do that deeper work. And because it is very scary to do that work and kind of unlearn who you've been taught, you know, who you thought you were. And, you know, we talk so much about social privilege, which obviously it is, but it often comes with cultural and energetic poverty, right? Of not knowing who you are, of not tapping into your body,
Exactly,
of not
the
knowing your ancestry.
disassociation, like
Yeah.
it's a like spiritual, energetic lineage form of disassociation that is, I believe, so much part of why there is this framework at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna get deeper into this in a little bit, but Senayit, I'd love if you could just share with us more a sense of who you are and some of your journeying that brought you to do this work. We'll say more full time. So how did you pivot from music to offering these workshops at Mountains Way? What drives this work for you? And then also some of your upcoming offerings and the vision that you're holding for this work.
Yeah, so yeah, from music into activism. Well, I believe art is activism in general. And I was born and raised in Manhattan. My father is from Ethiopia. My mom is British Isles background and settler colonialist family. But we were very much raised in our Ethiopian culture as much as the rest of the cultures that were happening in Manhattan in the mid 70s and early 80s. So from there, I really wanted to be a musician. So I played music. I got into like community work when I dropped out of college at 19 and joined AmeriCorps program. And so that was like sort of the beginning of being like, okay, there's this balance between an intellectual world and a physical world of assistance and community work. And then so had a number of years that I was like independently on my own out west doing music, doing my own thing, and eventually ended up back on the East Coast as my father was diagnosed and dying, as we found out later, from an aggressive form of Alzheimer's up in northern New England. So through a bunch of different circumstances, like I ended up being here full time. And in that, I started playing music up here And it was really hard. It got increasingly hard. It got increasingly hard in the last like 15 years as we've been having all of these videos coming out of police killings of Black people, of Indigenous people, the missing, murdered Indigenous women, like just all over the country. And I'm here in this very white area that does not want to deal with in any way what's going on in the rest of the country, what's going on in the rest of the world, and this kind of self-congratulatory way that Vermont and New Hampshire in the northern ends, and I'm sure Maine as well, are like, well, we don't have these problems here. Well, no, you don't, because they're, you know, the Indigenous people that are here are pushed out to the sides if they even know who they are. There's very few Black people. And so I would be performing and making very little money, and having this, like, these images burned into my mind of all of these murders when like before it was trauma porn, when it was just like no one even cared, right? So I would just go out and play this music and understand what African people have done for, like, what we think of as American music, which is the most like popular form of popular music in the world, because of the African influence that's just being completely ignored. So I'll go into a gig, sweat my ass off, you know, work really hard and put up all my PA, run the sound, and then play for a whole bunch of white folks who really don't care that we just had another lynching.
Yeah.
But they do really like to see us on screen or on the basketball court or on a video or playing in a bar or appropriating the music that's coming out of tragedy and grief. So I got to a place with a couple other folks that I knew that were artists, Black artists in the area, and we would just kind of have these wakes. Like, we would just get together and we'd weep and we would be angry and we would look through stuff and we would try to find a way to put our grief as what, you know, this is why this music is so beautiful, why our art is so beautiful, is transmute it into something. Like, you take nothing and, or worse than nothing, and create something from it. And then from there, recognizing that this is a battle of endurance. What do we need to do at this point to recognize, or to be able to feel safe enough to take a break, to you know, recharge our own personal, physical, energetic batteries, so to speak, to be able to then continue to go forth. Because so my daughter is 13. I don't think this is going to be done in her lifetime if we have a planet still. So I started getting into this in my own self-care and my own self-healing, to be able to find ways that I could maybe provide, like, just be a frontier person, in the sense of saying, okay, well, if we recognize logically that this isn't going to end anytime soon and we have all this work to do, what is it that we need to do to be able to sustain ourselves, to move from survival mode to thriving as well?
Yeah.
Where do we get the rest? What is it that I need? And, you know, in that sense, I'm trying to provide what I've been looking for, like what I would need right now.
And I think that's often the path, right? When kind of from our own wounds and experiences and lessons, when we get some tools and do some of that healing, that next step, which is really our responsibility and our soul calling, is to provide those tools and offerings to others so that they don't have to kind of suffer in the same way. Yeah. So Senayit, can you tell us a little bit more just about what offerings you are providing right now, how you're thinking about it, like what it looks like, so our listeners can just kind of have an understanding of more of the logistics and tangible pieces of this work.
Awesome. Yeah, I have 2 workshops that I'm running this summer. These came out of really trying to put together a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color, people of color retreat space last Interdependence Day, we'll call it, on the 4th of July. And a lot of white folks showed up, and there was a lot of like issues. So it seemed to be, it seemed to make sense. Like, I got enough donations from a weekend where it was supposed to be mostly Black and Indigenous folks that showed up, where it was all white, mostly white men who showed up. And then a couple supporting allies and accomplices that were there as well. And we got donations from that enough to pay it forward, you know, through word of mouth for some now very good friends of mine from Ecuador to come and have respite and do ceremony on the land, which brought me to these workshops. So the first one has to do with deaf midwifery and basically being able to help and walk people through transition spaces, whether it's a physical death or not. And this is with Opayemi Parnam and Anne-Marie Keppel. And the premise of these, and then I have another workshop with Renee and her friend Jessica. And Renee is a performance artist, and she is going to be, I can't, I'm not even going to paraphrase this properly. I will give you the links, and then y'all can look them up, because everybody who is doing these workshops is writing this better than I am going to speak it. The whole premise of this is that we have, especially up in northern New England, where we have a lot of like anti-racism workshops going on, where you don't have BIPOC folks running them. Mm-hmm. That I always have, I'm having BIPOC facilitators and white facilitators. And these are for white-bodied people, though any of the BIPOC family and friends of anyone who's participating or facilitating can come and just enjoy the land, enjoy our meals with us. That the idea is that we will be holding space in active listening in the beginning of every session, morning and afternoon, for BIPOC facilitators to do whatever they're going to do. So Opayemi has a bunch of skits ready for all of us, which I will be participating in. Mm-hmm. And then Renee, the whole thing she's doing is her whole performance piece. And then from there, the BIPOC facilitators get to leave. This is part of active listening, unless they actually actively direct the workshop participants to respond or ask them questions. No one's allowed to speak to them about what they brought. And then the white facilitators take it over in order for this to be also a safe space for white-bodied folks to be able to unpack what they need to do. And I'm Ethiopian, so the food component of these retreats is very important for me. I've been working really hard to make sure I have very limited participants in the actual workshops themselves, because what I like to do, what I believe and what is part of like my cultural tradition, is that if your soul and if your body is nourished, then your spirit can find its nourishment too. So there's a grounding in the physical body that is so hard for white-bodied folks in white communities to actually have experience with. I hope I'm answering you properly. This is such a work in progress. And what I'm really trying to do with these workshops is have the facilitators really create it under these kind of structures.
Yeah. And that was what I was just going to pull out, because I think that's so beautiful that you create the container, right? And kind of create this space for the offering, but then the facilitators decide how they want to fill that container. And you're very hands off in that, which I think is amazing. And also just how organic this has been. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more just about, it does take courage to do activism differently, and to enter into a new space and just try things without necessarily a blueprint for it, just based on kind of what happens and what it kind of you intuitively feel is needed in that moment. And my experience has been that that's really what you're doing here. And that's part of what makes it so very powerful, is that it's just this very organic unfolding based upon who's there and what needs to happen.
Exactly. The co-creation. I've been like kind of a supporting organizer for a bunch of different camps and groups and friends. And what I've noticed is that as organizers, like everything just tends to separate so much. And then if we can come together, we do have to have like this balance of enough of a framework to work underneath.
Mhm.
But it is also really important within that framework, which keeps us feeling safe, Yeah. is this kind of ability to look at who we are individually coming into any particular group.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Senayit. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more specifically about reparations and different ways of understanding reparations and understanding an energetic take on reparations. And also Senayit's take on why nourishment and radical hospitality for BIPOC folks is so important and imperative to this work. So please come back for the second half of Heart Change Consciousness after this break. Hello, and thank you for staying with us at Heart Change Consciousness. I'm here today with Senayit Tomlinson of Mountains Way Sanctuary, talking about the importance of respite for BIPOC folks and how it can be understood as a form of reparation. So these energetic reparations. So Senayit, before we delve back into our conversation, can you just let our listeners know how they can get in contact with you and learn more about some of these workshops we've been talking about?
Right. So right now, the best place to find me is on either Facebook through my Senayit Tomlinson page, which will be spelled out for you. I think I think I'm the only one that is on the planet that is Yankee and Ethiopian. And also through my Gmail account, which is Senayit with 2 T's at Gmail. And so those are the best ways to find me, and I get back to everyone as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Right. So I want to make sure that we have time to get into a conversation about reparations and a more in-depth conversation about it, because there's lots of conversations happening about racial reparations. And I know that this is something you're thinking deeply about. And these respite and retreat and workshop spaces that you're offering are kind of your offering, right? An understanding of energetic reparations. So oftentimes conversations of reparations solely focus on economic reparations, and obviously under white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, this is really important and vital. And as your work suggests, it doesn't need to be the only way of conceiving of reparations. So I also know that the land, in addition to the kind of human reciprocity and energetic reparations, is an important container for this work. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about the nuanced ways you're thinking about reparations and what this really means to you, some of the questions that you're thinking through.
Right. So one of the links that we'll share with you all are from podcasts that are really good beginnings of a rabbit hole to get into in all these. And the definition of reparations are making amends of wrong one has done to other people or another person by monetary amends or otherwise. And so we're looking at the otherwise part because there's a lot of conversations on reparations, and in the mainstream dialogue around it really has to do with money. And it has to do with, how much money, who's going to get it. And then again, the sort of like racist dialogue on, if we're going to give all this money away, like people better spend it properly, all of that. I believe that the reparations are deeper than that. And one of the things, as in addition to providing this on the land, is actually the space for white-bodied folks to have a way to provide reparations that are actually very direct.
Mhm.
So one of the things, like I'm a quarter of the way through medical apartheid. I can only take it a little bit at a time because it's so triggering and intense and just beautifully written and very dense. So there's so much in what I have been talking to with my Black sisters, especially, of how hard it is for us to not only say we need help, but then be able to go out and get help and then feel safe in that ask.
Mhm.
So one of the things I'm really trying to do with this, so my parents, my mother and father met a year after Love versus United States.
Wow.
So a year before they actually knew each other, it would have been illegal for any of us to be in existence or for them to be together. So when I was 6 months old in 1975, they bought 200 acres in unceded Abenaki land in New Hampshire in the foothills of the White Mountains. So I am working really hard in terms of, I know this is really powerful ceremonial land, like it was definitely a gathering place for people in how everything is situated in our southern exposure, even though we're in the mountains, that I really would like to honor the original inhabitants and users of that land, or stewards, to provide this spiritual, energetic care. That radical hospitality is providing something that just is so extremely welcoming that you can't help yourself, and also have it be provided by brown and Black people, and come to a place that you feel safe in, come to a place that you can wade through the Trump signs that are still up on my road and still up in the community at large here on the New Hampshire and Vermont side, to be able to reconnect with the land, to receive nourishment in terms of food, and just the rest is what keeps being so important. Being able to take a deep breath. I have like a lot of folks who end up coming for respite on the land, and they want to do all these things, and they end up sleeping for a number of days, which makes me feel happy. They sleep, eat, sleep, eat, sleep, eat, and actually is such the indication of, the 10 years less of like life expectancy that we have as Black and Indigenous people of color, the traumas that we receive in the hands of the medical world, in the hands of, like the school institutions, and in every other place where you're always an other, or it's just set up enough that you're definitely aware.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, uh, when we talked before, you said something about how nourishment needs to come before pleasure, right? Like before you can even open to the possibility of pleasure, right? Just nourishing what is and kind of meeting those basic needs and feeling safe enough and also worthy enough to have that container and that space to do that work, because it's soft, vulnerable work receiving nourishment, right? Especially if there's been a culture that's actively gaslighted, denied that, and told you that you are not worthy of it. And so, Senayit, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more just about the centrality of nourishment. And you like to use the term radical hospitality, which I and why this is so important to the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, so I'll talk about it, I guess, a little historically, personally, historically, in terms of my father, who came here in the early '60s. He was born in 1932 in Ethiopia and came here in the early '60s, and ended up the New York director of the New York office of the World Food Program, working with food insecurity. But it's also very much part of the Ethiopian culture. It's a very um,
Mhm.
dignified, distant culture in a sense, but food is primary. One of the way that we eat traditionally is all together in a big plate, and we go around feeding each other as a sign of respect. And no one is turned away in this format. And so um, I feel like the love and joy is like kind of, I mean, I guess for probably most folks, if you think about like water for chocolate, where
Mhm.
you have food that you are making that is just like filled with prayers and filled with whatever energy that you're in at that moment. And I do everything from scratch, and I love taking care of people's like dietary needs, especially when it is such a thing of shame for most folks. And also, so it's not just the need or the asking or the worth of it, it's even the ability to relax enough to, you may know you're worth it. I know I'm worth it. I should be able to have this, but can I relax enough? Do I feel comfortable enough to just allow someone else to just like walk to an outdoor kitchen and then lunch is set up and not have to think about, like, you didn't have to necessarily pay, you didn't necessarily have to do anything, you just had to make sure we knew that you could have the beautiful Vermont cheese or not, or whatever else we're offering. That feeling of, yeah, the quiet of safety to be able to accept and receive care, and accept and receive energetic healing, which I'm also offering for BIPOC folks in terms of the healing work I do in my studio, as you know, that is really about, you can come here and I'm not going to make any comments about your skin or your hair. I'll also know how to, do cranial work without messing up your braids or your dreads or whatever, but also really just this feeling of being able to relax and know that, like, you can just receive, you can let go of those things. And this is, I believe, is what's killing so many BIPOC folks so early. Like, we are dying because we are not able to rest. We don't have much time to relax, again, whether we understand that we're worthy of healing, worthy of nourishment, worthy of um, the radical hospitality in terms of general care for that body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking of, and we mentioned it last show, Joe Osias was on, and she's done some work with the NAP ministry, right? But the NAP ministry is making a very political statement about how rest for BIPOC folks is a form of reparations and is very, very necessary.
I
Um,
agree.
and that, so I mean that receiving, yeah, and I appreciate that. Even if one knows, right, that you're worthy, there's also just this like how,
Yeah, how
right?
and
Like
how do you
how
feel
do I?
comfortable?
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
have, so again, all these things are things I'm doing because it's stuff that I haven't been able to find myself.
yeah,
How do I relax enough to have the ability to receive? And these are the reparations. So I'm glad you brought us around, and you're doing that in your very beautiful way. That reparations in terms of the mainstream dialogue has to do with money. But the reality of reparations is that it has to do with education. It has to do with healing. It has to do with places and accessibility to healing and alternative ways of healing, and the recognition that in so many communities that there is this ongoing history of just actual horrible usage by medical and political and every other industrial complex you can think of, and it feels like it's just such an easy way to be like, well, we can't just give every Black person in the United States X amount of money, which is, of course, not even talking to the indigenous people of this country about the reparations of the stolen land. Mm-hmm. But that's like a whole nother podcast, right? Mm-hmm. That in these places that it can be so easily blown off. Oh, well, we can't do this. Well, actually you can. Because you could actually educate yourself by taking a workshop that does pay it forward to the facilitators and other people, or find these ways of, in a sense, anonymously doing this. Like, you do your work and you don't do it for virtue signaling. You do it for the actual reality that, you know, there are people that have been suffering for so long, for so many generations under these systems. It doesn't take away from anyone else's suffering, but actually means that, like, in one of these podcasts, what did she say? She said, it's like, you know, it's this idea of like, we always have to be so much better and still fail. Mm-hmm. And that creates, like, if people in this sort of larger white culture are obsessed with the looting and rioting and things like that, then that is the biggest time to then really reflect on what you're expecting people who have nothing and no care and no rest and no ability to move outside of anything on the basis of their race, not intelligence, not class, not anything else, right? On the basis of race, what that means for that. If people do not want this country to go down in flames, I believe that what we really need to do is make big strides forward to do this type of respite work, or the paying it forward for Black and Indigenous people of color to actually be able to utilize and find these safe spaces to receive care and be able to start feeling like we are loved. Mm-hmm. And not just worthy in our own sense, but that we are cared for in our community.
Yeah. And that care work, right? I mean, care work is a big part of the social justice movement that's really getting more attention now. I'm thinking, Senayit, about how, of course, in a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, reparations would be reduced to economics and solely economics, right? Because
Totally.
thinking about things energetically, or reciprocity, or just collaborative, cooperative exchanges of giving and receiving, that's not really on the radar. Everything's kind of based in this very contractual mindset and modality. I'm wondering, Senayit, before we run out of time, can you just name the podcasts? Because I think we have the visuals of it.
Yes. So the two podcasts that are really good, and they both have you know, conversations with folks who are doing other podcasts, so you can just really dive into this. The first one is Code Switch. And the one that I really love on the Code Switch in general is great because I found it, my partner turned me onto it during the last election. And I was finding that it was like all the questions on semantics, mm-hmm. all the things that I'm still looking to understand, also being like a Gen Xer, like post-racial, mm-hmm. generation, that the young people are really teaching me about, like really all the things I'd think about, but I'm in a white area and I can't really talk to anyone about. So code switch, and especially in code switch, it's called payback's a bitch, right? It's B asterisks. And then the other one is resistance. And I would just say it just started. I would just listen to all of them. And those are both NPR sponsored podcasts, and they're awesome. And I think that it is so important to really, like, as you were saying, the conversation about reparations in terms of money is a really easy way to dismiss the whole way we need to restructure things if people want the status quo to remain. I mean, because it's basically two ways. It's either going to burn down one way or it's going to burn down the other way. So if you actually want it to, so you can still have your Walmarts and all your things, then you probably want to look into these other ways to recognize what's happening in the rest of the culture around you.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of bring it back that as things are burning and crumbling, right? These old structures, they really are crumbling. Care and nourishment and really checking in with our bodies. These are tools and ways for kind of navigating all of these energetic shifts, because everybody, again, regardless of your social positionality, right? The structures are crumbling, and we are entering into this new space. So
yes, and no, and the food, like the ways we look into our own communities close by ourselves, I think is vital. How do we nourish each other where you can actually look across the street and see somebody?
Yeah. Senayit, we are almost out of time. If you want to remind people how to get in touch with you, because we didn't get to talk about it, but you also do healing work, you do sessions with people, and you have these upcoming workshops in June and July. If you want to just share before we...
Yeah, so you can find me as Senayit Tomlinson on Facebook, and we'll remind you of the spelling of my name and everything. And I can always be found on the personal message there or through my Gmail account, which is Senayit with 2 T's, as in Senayit Tomlinson at Gmail as well. And yeah, I'm also just totally open for folks who just want to have conversations about this. And we're trying to really build a network where we have lots of ways to not just say, y'all need to do this, but be like, y'all need to do this, and here, there's a multitude of options.
Yeah. Senayit, thank you so much for coming and taking the time to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it. It's really beautiful.
Thank you so much for doing this work, Trish. Much love.
Thank you. All right, that is our conversation of Heart Change Consciousness today. We'll be back next month. Thank you so much, and take care of your hearts. Thank you for tuning in to Heart Change Consciousness on transformationtalkradio.com with me, Dr. Trish DeRocher. Make sure to come back next time so we can continue to awaken your soul purpose. Look forward to more conversations with your favorite authors, change makers, influencers, activists, and many more who practice inspired spiritual activism and transform vulnerabilities into sources of strength. For more information about me and transformative consciousness coaching, visit transformativeconsciousness.com. That's transformativeconsciousness.com. This was Heart Change Consciousness on transformationtalkradio.com.